Hello, one and all. My name is not legally Flameflower, but that's what you can call me. And today I want to prove this channel is not solely when they cry content, because we're going to be talking about a different series entirely. That, of course, is Deathmark, which is probably one of my favorite horror series, which is saying something considering my love for horror. In fact, one of the reasons it's my favorite is because these games can actually scare, or more accurately, unnerve me, which is a rarity considering my consumption of the genre has made me used to the tricks it has to offer. First found this series thanks to watching Manly Badass Heroes walkthrough of all three games, which is probably how many people learned about the game. Flash forward a few years, I bought the game for myself as a way to more properly experience them. This is to say I'm quite familiar with the series, but for those who aren't, Deathmark games are often tied together by the titular Deathmark, which is a curse given by spirits who died with a bunch of resentment onto humans who crossed them. This mark will kill the person in a few days if they don't purify the spirit that gave it to them, which serves as the main progression. The games are often broken up into many different sections, each focusing on a different spirit in particular and the journey to purify them. This often comes down to exploring the location they inhabit, finding items, avoiding them killing you, learning about their grudge when they were alive, and finally facing off against them, often coming down to using the right items to help you move on. Now, there is certainly more to it than that, as the stories often revolve around taking down one spirit in particular that causes all the other spirits to come up. But taking down these individual spirits is by far the main focus of the games. In fact, while Deathmark 1 does have a story, I'd say it's mostly just an excuse to put you up against these spirits. And that isn't a bad thing by any means, as these spirits are often engaging in their own ways, which is why I wanted to take the time to rank each of them from worst to best. Now, before we go any further, I do need to clarify some of the things about this list. First off, this list will only include spirits that you properly face off against. That means spirits who just exist in the Deathmark universe like Mock Princess, whatever the fuck Rosé is, and the vending machine ghost will not be counted. This is because the metric I will use doesn't work for them, and they would probably rank very low if they were included because they just don't have enough to them / enough time with them to make them super engaging, except maybe Rosé. There is one annoying exception to that, and that is D-Man, who is technically does have an encounter, but like, come on. I don't have the best reason to not include him, but I just can't because he doesn't fit well in. In addition to that, we're only counting spirits from the games and any information presented to them, so nothing with the audio dramas like Blue Demise, in part because I haven't actually listened to them. That is also why I won't be talking about one character's backstory in particular because it isn't presented in-game. With those guidelines set, this means there's a total of 8 spirits from the first game, 7 from NG Spirit Hunters, and 5 from Deathmark 2. Yes, the third game in the series is Deathmark II, for a total of 20 spirits to rate. These will be determined by a myriad of things such as the location they are in, the way they try to kill you and scare you, their backstory, their design, how you purify them, any bad ending deaths, what they have to offer to the story as a whole, and anything else I can think of that would be important to mention. I'd like to think I have some expertise in doing so, as well as I've gone through the series twice, with the only part that I was experienced for the first time was the amusement park DLC that came out last year, aka I literally couldn't have experienced it before, and made sure to take notes and stuff during my playthrough in preparation. Even still, this is just my opinion, and I'm curious how it compares to the consensus among fans as I'm not sure what that is, which also means you won't have any bias from that as this is simply my opinion and nothing else. One last reminder, this video will contain massive spoilers for the entire franchise. As you can tell by my love for this series, I would recommend you experience it for yourself. This is your last warning because I won't hold anything back when the ranking actually starts. Are you ready? Okay, let's do this. Number 20. Pool Ghost, Deathmark 2. If there was ever a spirit I wish I could disqualify from this list, but just couldn't because it technically fulfills the requirements, it would be Pool Ghost. Now, I could explain why that from a traditional matrix, but it doesn't really explain why this is so low, for I think the design is decent even if I wish I could get a better look at it. The location of the pool is cool as the place can bring an otherworldly appeal to it, see games like The Aquarium Does Not Dance to see why, and they certainly have a backstory. Now, from this point onwards, I will explain each backstory before going into the spirit, but I didn't hear because there isn't much. All I'll say is that they were a victim of Hanako, which the idea of them being caused by another spirit is kinda cool, but when your other part of the backstory is they lost their bow and they were sad about it, I think you can see why they rank so low, and if that wasn't enough to convince you, you learn about them and deal with them within the span of 30 minutes. If I had to guess, there may have been something if the game had more time and money, but was cut or watered down when it came down to it in the end. It is because of that, any other spirit, despite their faults, still has something there over nearly nothing, and why it gets a spot at the bottom. And with that, The next spirit on this list I think is the first proper ranking, as it at least doesn't rank so low because it has so little to talk about. Number 19, Yuri Takemura, NG Spirit Hunters. Okay, well, it wasn't much more, but it's still more. Yuri was friends with Amy and Hazuki, however would soon find herself wrapped up in Kaguya's curse, where she would later die from after she failed and was run over by a car. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I should include this one as well, but I guess if I'm gonna include Pool Ghost, I might as well do this one. Yuri Takemura is a spirit that is encountered during the prologue as she died from Kaguya's curse and is used as an introduction to the spirits. Unlike every other spirit, you don't actually purify them, so that is probably the biggest reason I didn't feel like putting them on the list, because they're more of a one-off encounter. Still, I'll give them credit where it's due, as they are a good introduction to the game. The prologue of NG is about 2 hours, and is pretty tame as characters are introduced, but here and there you get ominous little hints of what's to come. One of them that I like is when Akari, the protagonist of the game, finds Yuri found the same black postcard that he did right before the night she died. In addition to that build-up, it's also something that NG does really well in having you take the same route over and over again, so that when they change things, it catches you off guard. You go through this alley the first couple of times without much note, but then you see Yuri's spirit flash before you as a car comes to run you over. For further clarification, this series has a lot of different names for when you need to choose a choice in order to survive. However, to simplify things, I'm just going to call all of them Live or Die, even if they weren't called that in their respective game. This particular Live or Die section is decent and gives you a good idea what to expect going forward. In addition to that, the fact that both Akari's niece Amy and Hazuki knew Yuri does help a bit more into a personal connection and shows what Kaguya is capable of. Still, there isn't much else. Even if it does an overall solid job, it also just comes and goes not long after. It more works well in setting up the narrative of the game, but as a spirit of its own, even if other spirits I may have more issue with, I'd rather something that I get a bit more of, even if it isn't always the best. Number 18, Miss Zoo, Death Mark 1. For the first real ranking, and the one that's not easy to explain, we have Miss Sue. When she was alive, she was a science teacher who loved animals far more than humans. Despite that, she would one day find love, but later be rejected because of her hobbies. This caused her to want to become a spirit, and did so thanks to, in her own words, the great god Azura. Let's go over some basics before we get into the meat of it. To start off, I think the introduction is pretty well done, all things considered. The idea of showing someone becoming a spirit of their own will could be interesting, considering how dangerous they already are. And it also connects well to figuring out what happened to the Buddha statues, which is part of the main plot. In addition to that, while the location is similar to Hanahiko, they do enough to make it its own thing. The various experiments and animal heads give off a completely different vibe of a mix between a jungle and a lab. And that one room is a perfect peak as it's chosen in full. All the animal heads and ritualistic imagery fits well in creating this messed up location. Then there is her main form of trying to kill you, which is tests, as Miss Sue tests you in the form of multiple choice tests. And I do in part like these because it shines a light on the stress of tests you barely studied for and now have to make your best guess or you're gonna be killed. That's at least what happens when it's good, but some of them aren't as much. The history ones just straight up ask you history questions that hopefully you know history or you're fucked, which is a bit unfair, but nothing compared to the last test, as I tried, and I mean I tried to understand the logic of the answers and deciphering the notes, but I just can't see it. And the last question makes no sense in the way it's phrased. Why would I think the thing that isn't sealed is the one thing that wasn't used? Wouldn't it be the other way around? That was my thinking why I chose it last. Another thing I think this spirit does a poor job of is its design, which the idea of a chimera-esque human sounds cool, but the end result is far from scary, especially with the fan service. The first game has an annoying problem of these fan service moments for what should be scary moments, and this is one of them, and the one with Hiroi doesn't help this spirit's case at all. However, to truly understand why this spirit got such a low ranking, you need to understand a lot of what Death Mark means to me as a series, and why I think this spirit does a poor job of communicating that. This series revolves around how spirits are made to seem like our enemies through the hatred which is founded upon their grudge. However, deep down, they are still human beings who, most of the time, were unlucky and met a tragic end. There's a reason why Yashiki, the main protagonist of Death Mark 1 and 2, is called the Spirit Doctor, and that is because he helps heal spirits. I'll go more into the spirits who show this idea better, but you want to know a way that doesn't do that? When you face Miss Sue, I wasn't exactly clear what her grudge was because of her backstory, as she apparently wanted to be a spirit. That makes it hard to know what I need to do to finish her off, and the actual answer doesn't help. What you need to do is present a charm of her god, Azura, and then threaten to burn it, which makes her upset. This causes her to touch you and attempt to get it back, but you still burn it anyways. Then, the snakes on her detect the human scent on her from when she touched you and bite her, which makes her happy for some reason. How does that make any sense? What part of her wanted to get bitten by her own snakes? Not to mention, the way the scenario plays out is something you could have never reasonably predicted. So I'm confused afterwards. I don't feel like I helped her because I have no clue why that helped, and this makes the whole encounter feel hollow. This dissonance between the player and the goals of the narrative are really bringing the spirit down low. And while this may seem like a nitpick, it is really important and something that I don't think any other spirit has such an issue with because of how important it is. Fucking Pool Ghost did a better job at it. I think that says something. So it takes such a low ranking as a result. Number 17, Shinio, Death Mark 1. Shinio was originally part of a honeybee farm that was also a cult that received hatred from the outside world. That caused them to perform a suicide ritual in order to go to paradise, which somehow went wrong for Shinio as he didn't die correctly. As such, his bitterness of being alone and unable to see his friends caused his spirit to form. You like bees? I honestly think there's something that can be said about the bee jokes, like it's ironic they play so low despite that. And the reason why comes to what I put as my notes as, for everything I like, there's something about this spirit I equally dislike. The location is a good start. The suicide forest is a great idea in concept, as the forest where people go to off themselves is a dark and depressing theme that fits well within the series. Not to mention, when you navigate it, you can find and hear the souls of people who died, along with the encounter with a man who is about to die, that you help convince him not to, only for him to get killed by the spirit to further cement that fact well. However, the location is also way too big. Navigating the place is fine, except for how easy it is to miss an item, and if you do, good luck finding it because of how big the place is. It might not be so bad if you're lucky to find everything, but I didn't, and I had the displeasure of having to comb through the place again to find what I was missing. Moving on, the spirit poses a considerable threat, as they have an army of bees that they made homes for out of human corpses, which is quite disturbing, as you will share a similar fate if you don't play your cards right. That is cool, but this place also has my least favorite case of fan service in the series, and what's worse is that it comes at the start, which throws off the entire tone. At least other times you're already a good way into it, so it doesn't throw you off too much, but this particular case requires a lot of work for the game to recover, which really undermines the otherwise good atmosphere this place has. In addition to that, we have the live or die section, which mostly makes sense, with a lot of the answers being logical or have some sort of hint the game gives you, is what I would say if it weren't for the final encounter. Now, it otherwise makes sense, including the purification, which I'll get into in a sec, but there is one part I hate. From the start of the game, we are told we can't use weapons on spirits because they're ghosts, which makes sense. The only time a weapon works is if it ties to the spirit's lore, such as for Miss Sue, loud sounds work against her because it overstimulates her snakes. Despite that, for one part of the encounter, you have to use either the bat or gun to shoot/hit the spirit back. Now, someone who has played the game might argue one of the notes from the cult says something about hitting someone with a stick as part of the ritual. To that I say, there is a difference between a non-lethal tap with a stick and full-on shooting them with a gun. Maybe I'm the idiot, but the fact this goes against a rule that has been ingrained from me from the start is such a big annoyance, as I died so many times trying to figure it out. Now for the purification. You need to give them the proper poison after weakening them, which you can miss because of how big the forest is. For those curious, as I've yet to mention, but spirits can actually be defeated in two ways. One is purification and the other is destroying them. Destroying them is done through violence or curing their grudge in a way that still makes them angry. This in turn will cause a bad end for a spirit in which they kill one of your companions afterwards. I didn't mention it for Miss Sue because it wasn't that interesting for her. Neither is it for Shinio. Death Mark 1 is one of the only games of the three that doesn't go for the gruesome portraits of the other, so they are often much weaker in comparison. Most of the time at least. There are some good ones we'll get to. This is also to say you can miss the purification and only have the means to destroy them if you don't reload your save, which can be an annoyance. Finally is the backstory, which I don't find compelling. We are told about the cult's hatred of humanity at the end, and by that point I lack any meaningful understanding of why they would do what they did beyond what I'm told, which is really needed for a backstory that isn't something people would normally do, and as such I just don't feel much of a connection to them. This all makes it for a spirit that has many highs and lows, and seeing how good spirits are generally, that was enough to get a spot this low despite the many things I think the spirit does well. Number 16. Demon Tsukiyomi, NG Spirit Hunters. Years before the events of NG, a group of about 25 people were taken hostage in a department store during Christmas. This was from a man who wanted to play Demon Tsukiyoma game with them, which involved burning the people alive to grant a wish. This wish was to bring his mother back, but due to the nature of the way wishes worked, the loudest wish was heard, and that was of the many people who wanted to survive. That wish caused them to survive as the Demon Tsukiyomi. Okay, this is going to be a bit difficult one to talk about considering the spirit and the many aspects of it are deeply connected to another one you take on before. Nonetheless, I'll try my best. To start off, a thing I love that these games do is when a spirit gives birth to what was once legend because of the nature of their deaths relates to it. I guess Demon Tsukiyoma might be real, but that was only a theory, and at the very least, the game makes it clear that this isn't the real one. I like this because it goes into the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, an idea of how we project our own fear onto something causes it to manifest, which is a real issue nowadays as fear is a powerful weapon that the series explores in full. Now, let's get into the reason the spirit is ranked so low, and that is because of the investigation. The actual investigation is mostly fetch quest, which on its own isn't the worst, but the fact you have to hear the Jingle Bell music gets so annoying. I get it's supposed to be scary because it's happy music in contrast to the dark reality of the situation, which might have worked if it was just a flashback, but it's lost when you have to keep hearing it. Maybe that was a point, and if it is, I don't see the vision. I'm sorry. Another minor nitpick, but I have to mention, I don't understand why the arsonist has Kakia's marks on him. Kakia escaped after all this happened, so how did she get him, and why? It doesn't change his motivation at all. Okay, but let's get to the good. The location of the department store locked in time is good enough, but the fact it's quite literally a time space that keeps resetting further adds to it. Plus, we get to see the burnt remains of where the Demon Tsukiyomi game took place, which is a nice touch. The design perfectly captures the horrid fear of the people involved as they melt away from the fire, and hearing them cry during the flashback help adds to the tragedy. In addition to that, from what we later learn with another spirit, is how this tragedy caused another one by proxy, which further adds to its unfortunate nature. The final confrontation is mostly good. Giving the kids the right toys they wanted for Christmas is nice, and a funny thing that I think is interesting is one of the kids gives a hint that they want the robot by saying pew pew bang bang, which can also be interpreted as them wanting the shotgun. The second part doesn't make as much sense. I don't know how you're supposed to know which spirit calling out for the mob is the arsonist in particular, as what they say is very similar. Also, none of the notes you have for the moment say anything about that the arsonist wanted his mom back, but it is all made up for by one of the best purifications in the entire series. However, because it relates to another spirit, I can't go into much detail at the moment, but no, it's really cool. We also get a good flashback at the end that helps connect the plot together with Kakia and shines a new light on another spirit. Overall, a good spirit, but also a bit short, so that combined with the lackluster investigation did bring it down a bit, but far from made it a bad time. In fact, from now on, the spirits have more good than bad, so let's continue on. Number 15, Hanako of the Toilet, Death Mark 2. Hanako is friends with a girl named Naomi as they had a very close bond. Hanako was often bullied by her peers, but Naomi, a much more popular girl, stopped it. This caught a snag when Naomi realized she had feelings for Hanako and confessed them, only to have that information used as blackmail by the bullies to prevent her from interfering. The bullies would later force her to act out of the Hanako of the Toilet, which involved her fake hanging herself, which only resulted in her accidentally actually hanging herself. I wish I could give the Yuri a higher ranking, but here we are. However, I will say I appreciate this game to not only be able to go into stuff like this, but actually committing. There is no interpretation, which is nice considering some people might have issue with how the games could have had queer baiting at times. I disagree, but it can be seen with both Yashike Mashita and Deathmark and Akari and Seiji in NG. Shows and how this game often likes depicting spirits as people of minorities, such as most of the spirits being women, some with mental illnesses, and a few unique ones will get there when we get there. And they do so in a way that I think helps shows why people like this can often be on the outside, which builds up anger within them as that they let out against the people who discriminated against them, which only makes these people see them as a problem all the more. Hanako is a good example of this theme, as her spirit would later go and kill her bullies, who would start the events of Death Mark 2 over her actual death. That being said, we have some other things to talk about, and that includes the location. Now, I say that with air quotes because Death Mark 2 is a bit unique considering the school is the main location of the entire game, but certain sections are used for different spirits. Hanako's location is the bathroom, which honestly I can't tell if it is genius or terrible. On one hand, bathrooms, especially school bathrooms, are places you feel uncomfortable and vulnerable in, but on the other hand, the places are more disgusting than scary. It's far from the worst location the series has to offer, but also feels like it's on the cusp of something great, but just lacks it. As for the spirit themselves, they pose a good threat like Shinio. Not only do they kill their bullies, which we see at the start of the game, but they also later twist the script in a devilish manner. For Naomi is still alive and actually tries to confront Hanako to make up with her, but instead is killed. This would later repeat across the game as a target of the spirit is killed, but this is the first time around and it caught me off guard. Another thing that catch me off guard with is the purification, which is different. You will purify them normally, but in order to get the good ending, you also have to make sure Naomi's soul is satisfied as well, which is sweet as Hanako's purification is presenting the song they worked on together. There is also a good hint that you need to do this as the game shows her flash for a second after purification, and certain dialogue that hints at it. Now, that isn't to say I don't have my issues, the main one being the design, which Death Mark 2 seems to drop a ball a bit at times. The bottom half is good, but the top part is not doing it for me. The other thing that got this rank is that it takes a bit too long before it gets good, as due to the structure of the game, Hanako is both present during Chapter 1 and 2, and probably extended her a bit more than she was capable of. If she was just focused on Chapter 2, it probably would have been stronger, but instead drags it out a bit too long. Still, the payoff is worth it, it's just a bit hard to reach. Number 14, Kubutaro of Kintoki, NG Spirit Hunters. She was the daughter of the chief of the village, although it was hard to tell because she suffered from obesity. She also suffered from a learning disability and wasn't the brightest as a result, for she thought a stuffed bear was her little brother. When the bear lost his head, she sought the two mystical trees to revive him, but misinterpreted the means to do so by bringing the head of living being. That didn't work, so in anger she chopped one of the trees down. The chief didn't like this and saw to her to be tied to the other tree and burned alive. Another case of someone who was demonized because of their differences, and this one is particularly sad because no one cared to try and help her, but instead sought to kill her in a very brutal and abhorrent fashion. Another interesting detail is how we don't learn that they were a girl until partway through the investigation, as most people thought they were a man as they were a very large imposing figure with an act. They do well also with how they act in a way that is almost oblivious to what they're doing. Like, most spirits are like that, but it's far more prominent in her case. Yet, she is still a threat all the same. She's found taking off the heads of dogs and anyone who gets in her way. In fact, there's a particularly dark scene of a dog tied to a phone pole with its head cut off and blood spewed all over it. Worse is when they kill Maruhashi, which is something I didn't expect and sad because I was starting to like him. That being said, I can't sing the praises without mentioning some of the downsides as well. The big one being the location, which is just a city street that honestly lacks a lot of identity as you don't really interact with it in a meaningful way. The only prominent part is the ending of the well in the shrine. In addition to that, some of the live or die sequences are a bit poor. The first one with the police felt very random on the correct answer, and when you need to confront them, you need to hand or throw the dog's head to them, which wouldn't be so confusing if not for the spirit before them having mixed messages on what you need to do with that. I don't even remember what the correct answer was, so I think that kind of shows my point. The design is also fine. Not the most memorable one, but not bad. Okay, enough negativity, back to the positives. The final confrontation is good otherwise, as you need to deal with the stress of the oncoming train, which is also foreshadowed well, and replacing the head of the teddy bear / brother is what satisfies your grudge. In addition to that, I can talk about the bad endings again. The ones before just didn't have much, or were cases where I didn't count it because it didn't count in a way that was related to the spirit, but this is different. NG has some really graphic bad ends, and I love them. You actually have two, one for Seiji and one for Huzaki. Seiji's is fine as you get his head chopped off, but Hazuki's is one of my favorites in the series as you get a phone call from her that sounds normal, only for it to be played back and have her head sliced off, but still in her body as she dreads her death and has the spirit ominously stand over her. Once again, it has some rough moments, but still good all around. That does mean it gets a lower spot, but it's up against tough competition, so this was the best I could offer. Number 13, Mr. Kokuri, Death Mark 2. When he was alive, him, his wife, and his child went out into the woods. At that time, high schoolers were getting high off of mushrooms and accidentally killed said wife and child. The man swore revenge, especially against the dealer who he later tried to face down, but was killed by them instead. At this point, you probably get the idea of these spirits. They have some good, some bad, with the ones ranking higher just not having as significant falls or having better highs. Mr. Kokiri was one of the harder ones to rank, as they do have some aspects of that, but do so in a way that gives them a lot of good build-up with meh payoff, which normally I'd rank it much lower, but that build-up is so good that I hesitate to knock it down too much. To start off, the spirit centers around shrooms, and the investigation beforehand does a good job with that, as we see the ability to control other people to make them violent, which is a good play off what they normally do. In addition to that, we get some notes about the research behind the mushrooms and what their deal might be. And we also have some great liver dissections, arguably the best ones in the series, from A trying to test if you're psychic, and the answer is to scare him with the centipede instead of playing his game, or the iconic moment when you have to fight his spirit by getting high off of mushrooms and having a shootout. It's a brilliant mix of absurdity that doesn't lose threat of the situation, as it's more something you look back on and realize how crazy it was. In addition to that, the forest is a good location as we see the mushrooms start to overtake it and see the result of them all over the place and emphasize the threat of the spirit. But as I said, this comes with poor payoff, and that comes in the final confrontation. First off, the backstory wasn't that engaging. I feel like it's missing something because it's otherwise is all revealed at once instead of slowly picked away, which doesn't help with creating a connection with the spirit. Plus, the connection with the mushrooms just doesn't do it for me. I want a bit more because there's less a personal connection with the mushrooms beyond a means to a terrible end. Admit that I don't know if I can properly explain that feeling, but I tried. What I can get more concrete answers on is design, which I'm willing to believe different people are scared by different things. But I can't think of a single person who is scared by this thing. What is this goofy thing? Maybe part of his grudge is wanting a better design, which is fair. In addition to that, the final confrontation is just you saying who committed the crime, which is something the spirit already knows, so I don't really understand how that clears the grudge, especially when you don't even give the actual name of the culprit. If that sounds confusing, it makes more sense in game. But I wouldn't be done without saying the end section does one thing right, and that is the bad end. The setup of this one is cool diversion from the established formula of the spirit actually causes it in a clever way. It's by Hiro stealing the mushroom samples that she's made very clear she wants, and that causes her to lose and have mushrooms burst from her head in a horrifying fashion before exploding. It also works well with their grudge, as the mushrooms that cause this mess are something that should stay hidden. As you can see, this spirit has some of the highest highs and lowest lows. I feel like you could probably make a case why they should be lower, but I can't help but not forget how enjoyable those highs were and give it a higher ranking, as this is my list at the end of the day, and I can give the spirit whatever ranking I feel like. With that, it also marks the end of these more good and bad mixes of spirits, as the following trio of spirits have more one major issue that holds back my enjoyment of the spirit, as they are otherwise pretty strong. Number 12. Hanayome, Death Mark 1. It was supposed to be a happy day for the bride of the wedding, but she would instead find herself being dragged out and sexually assaulted by a group of men while walking her dog. The dog tried to run for help, but was later run over and killed. What's worse, they took pictures of the whole thing and later used it as blackmail for the husband. However, in the end, she found the incident too much and killed herself. This is another backstory that is just hard to go through. On its own it's tragic, but the way the game goes about communicating it only makes it hurt all the more. We see Hanayome's trauma manifest in her cursing anything that has to do with eyes. We later find bloody photos of the men who committed the incidents with their eyes pierced by needles. Along with that, her cries of pain when Yashiki is forced to test her in order to get progress are painful. The worst of which is when you need to use a flash camera to stun her. All of this does a great job of painting her suffering of her trauma that displays the horror of the incident in a way that impacted the individual. That is to say, it gets an S+ for backstory. And that's not even mentioning the husband who would later kill the culprits, which is a delightful mix of badass and sweet. Another thing I both love and hate is the fact there's no fan service here. Like, they knew with the backstory revolving around sexual assault they probably shouldn't sexualize women, but at the same time, if they knew that, they should have known better than have it at all in a horror game where it doesn't fit most of the time. I'll get to that later. Still, this isn't the only metric on which these spirits are judged, and as such is why it gets this spot. As I said, there is one major flaw with the next couple of spirits, and this one is the location. Location is a bunch of phone booths in the middle of random places, which is kinda eerie, but you also spend so little time, and just go back to the suicide forest that Shinio was in. At least that time there isn't stuff that's easy to miss. That gives a lack of identity to the spirit in certain aspects, but I find the location also helps understand parts of what the spirit feels, and that not being there is a drawback. Enough with that, because once again, I have a lot of positives to list off. The live or die sections are good. One interesting thing this game does that would probably be annoying if it wasn't funny is that you need to have Suzu as a partner or you just die immediately at one point. While there is little indication of this, that also means the spirit kills you for having Ada with you, which is fair. If you don't know who Ada is, have one lick and you'll understand. Okay, this is a joke. Ada's a pretty good person all around, but I like to hate him for no reason because his type of person is normally annoying. Besides, even Yashiki dislikes him at times. These sections also include the dog, whom both make sense for being there and has a creepy design. Finally, the confrontation is unique, but works to an extent. Unlike literally any other confrontation, you need to spend time during it to play the tapes her husband made to test her reaction to find the right one. That being the one they never released that was specially made to heal her soul. The only part that kinda sucks is the way you need to purify the spirit. Like, it makes sense why the forest was the difference, but unlike any other destroy, she didn't seem that upset when I played the tape in the other places, just less happy. But that's not that important as we get some other great stuff. The design is superb when she reveals the crooked messed up face hidden under her. In addition to that, we get a great bad ending, as it on its own isn't that good if it weren't for how they communicate her anger once more and reveal the horrifying truth that the sound of her chewing was that of chewing eyes. I know there's another point where you can figure it out, but it's easy to miss. Plus, a little bonus I love is the spirit apologizes to you after purifying it as a show of goodwill, which is nice considering how further shows that they weren't a bad person, but molded by the circumstances around it. In the end, while the location is rough, I'd say it's water under the bridge compared to the dark and unnerving tragedy of Hanayomi, and one that is more than a pleasure to finally heal, seeing as you reunited her with her loved one and dog to finally rest in peace.
Number 11.
This is the first big one. Our first main antagonist of the game is Rake. Before I reveal who that is, I want to talk about what makes them a bit unique compared to a normal spirit. These spirits are, for one, often dolls or have some aspect of them be dolls, but more importantly are often present through the whole game. And for 2 out of the 3 games are a constant threat that Yashiki/Akari are dealing with. This means they normally have a leg up considering they not only get a lot of time to develop, which I know I criticized in Hanako, but that was because the spirit didn't work well for a longer period of time, and that often gives them a more personal connection both to the player and the themes of the game. If they can nail these aspects, they can rank really high as a result, but it also is a double-edged sword at times, because if they don't keep up well with the plot, even if they are an interesting villain, it can really drag because they are not something you just move on from at the end of a chapter. And out of the 3, the one I think who suffers the most from this, despite being very interesting all the same, is Mary, the antagonist of the first game. First, she poses as an innocent doll who offers to help Yachiki and the others hunt down spirits who curse them with the marks. Little did they know that doing so was to spark unrelenting dread and fear within them. All of that to make the moment when she was finally ready to feast on Yashiki, for she was the one who gave him his mark, and she could wait no longer for her hunger to be satiated. Let's get the elephant out of the room of why I think Mary drops the ball a bit, and that is for around 1/3 of the game, she gets temporarily destroyed by the Black Rabbit. This causes her to be out of the story up until the end where the truth is revealed to Yashiki, and she reappears to him for one final face-off. This causes the moment where she does reveal herself, again to be a bit lackluster because she just comes back with little build-up, and that diminishes the impact of that moment that the game has otherwise built up well. It really is that simple as to why she was knocked out a lot. Also, before I get into the good, I want to mention her backstory. This is the only backstory that isn't mentioned in-game, and instead in the art book of all things, which means I'm not taking it into account. If you're curious to what it is, you can look it up for yourself. I don't really feel like mentioning it if it doesn't impact the ranking. Okay, now for the good. So Mary in many ways is a great representation of the way perception can impact us. Compared to the other spirits who are often meant to be terrifying beasts with intent to kill, Mary's a cute doll who can't even stand. Despite that, they are quite the opposite. The spirits are actually real people who are burdened by the unbridled hatred that gave rise to their spirit, but still have their humanity deep down. Mary, on the other hand, hides her true nature, one of extreme malice and hate to everyone. That is the truth we learn throughout the game, and despite the appearances and actions one holds, the truth to them can be far different. Furthermore, Mary is the embodiment of hatred that causes spirits to try and kill everyone. That part of her she uses in a way to get characters like Yashiki to fear them. She uses that fear not only to feed her, but trick them. By making them seem evil, she tries to trick Yashiki by hinting that they shouldn't be afraid to make them suffer to deal with them. She wants that because when you do, that spirit takes one of your friends in revenge, which only causes a perpetuated hatred to spiral. This is further added on by the fact that the game's best ending can only be reached if you don't let any mark bearers die, for otherwise the grudge of those who died, birthed from the hatred Mary weaponized, is used to bring her back after defeating her. That's not to mention a bunch of subtle details around her that really add to this. When you finally confront her and expose the truth, her pretty face starts to crack away as she emerges with a much more fitting appearance that represents her true hatred. In addition to that, the spirit before her deals a lot with the World War II, as she was the one who brought it to light, and I can't help but notice how a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes indirectly caused a huge massacre upon the Japanese people, which shows an example of how this can connect to the real world. The designs convey her deal well, and the final encounter with her, while a bit quick, works well as you have to seal the arm that was hinted in the picture. I like her location as the mansion, a place that was otherwise safe haven from the dangers of the spirits. Also, I like how she is revealed with the antique pillow found beforehand. While it doesn't confirm it for the protag, it's a major hint that makes you realize and put the dots together without the game spelling it out. I think she does a solid job as the first antagonist of the series and representing the themes of the story. And I wish I didn't have to be so harsh, but I think some of the messaging is easy to slip by when she disappears for 1/3 of the story, so that's why I think this is a fair ranking for her. Number 10. Killer Peach, NG Spirit Hunters. This is the spirit that relates to Demon Tsukiyoma, for after the fire that caused the spirit's death, the father of the arsonist was the head of a huge company in Japan, and hid the truth from the public. However, one woman found out the truth and wanted justice after her husband and child were killed in the fire. She confronted the man, but him and a group of 4 other people helped kill her via decapitation, leaving her thirst for justice unsatisfied. Killer Peach is a spirit that's one of the most unique ones in the series, and as such was another one that was hard to rank. Not only does she appear after you satisfy her grudge in the chapter after due to the time travel elevator caused by Demon Tsukiyomi, but she also has more humanity than most spirits. When confronted, the group is actually able to hold a conversation with her, as most spirits only say things in relation to how they feel, but Killer Peach actually makes arguments for herself. Not very complex ones, but it still counts. Another bonus she has is her introduction that has a lot more agency, as Kaguya decides to beat up the curse to Akari, causing him to have much less time before even reaching the building. That and how she stalks her prey is very ominous, as you don't know when she will strike, but it will be deadly with that katana she has. The main issue is the investigation. The location is an office building, which I got was trying to make the idea of repetitive office work with how many repeating offices there were, but it doesn't really relate much to the spirit, as they were more seeking vengeance against certain people for the deaths they caused. And as was hinted before, the investigation is a bit annoying with the progression. A lot of things are easy to miss and slow progression that doesn't do much to keep the presence of the spirit alive. It doesn't help they wait a while before they finally attack, which I get, but is also way too similar to what the spirit before did, and loses a bit of its identity because of that. But once the spirit starts attacking you, that's when things get good again. Well, okay, there's one exception I have to complain about, and that is when you need to answer why you're here to investigate, and the answers are either you're here to investigate the people who killed you, corruption, or the serial killings. At this point, we don't know about the fire, so the only death we know about is Peach herself, so why would I think it's a serial killing? I thought it wasn't that because she's the one who's been killing a bunch of people as revenge, so she wouldn't be happy if I was investigating that, but she thought she was doing the right thing. That being said, they are otherwise fine, as most of them are actually you talking to spirit and trying to convince her that you're on their side. The final confrontation is also good, as they need to show them the memorial tape of the last man who died to allow her to be satisfied. Her destroy is also good if you spray the cologne the men wore all over her, as because she hunts by scent, it sends her into a frenzy and she stabs herself to death. The design is also cool as well, with many different animal heads, which can have a lot of interpretations I can think of, but doesn't feel out of place. Her bad ends are decent. They are delayed by a lot, which means you find them at the start of the Demon Tsukiyomi investigation, which is a nice twist, but the deaths themselves are fine. Rose is a bit too fanservice-y with her being naked for no reason, and Fans is fine. I feel perfectly fine with it. However, where the spirit truly shines is during the Demon Tsukiyomi chapter, as we see the power of helping these spirits find closure. When Killer Peach comes back and tells you what happened, she actually gives you her katana to finish the fight, as she places her faith in you as you build the connection. This is one of those moments that really shows the spirits have more than just malice to them, and by carrying on her fight, you get one of the best payoffs ever. During the final part of the Demon Tsukiyomi fight, you need to write the name of the true forgotten victim of the fire, not the man who caused it, but the woman who lost her family and soon her life in the pursuit of justice. By writing her name, she comes back once more to deliver the finishing blow to the arsonist, saying her iconic "justice is served," but no longer in red. It's now her, free from the curse of malice as you've helped her, and with it she helps save you from the spirit and save all the innocent people who got trapped in it. And as a nice note, just as the demon is fading away, the daughter of Killer Peach says her mom is just like Momotaro, the anime hero she loved. No moment shows just how satisfying it is to heal the spirits compared to this one, and even if it took some time to get to love her, Killer Peach won me over in the end as we worked together to heal the damage of that tragedy, showing her the justice she was denied for so long. Number 9. Now that we finished the trio of one major drawback, we have the trio of a solid all around. These are spirits who I don't have any major complaints and do well with what they're trying to communicate, but just fall short of the best for one reason or another. In the end, they are still very good, but not everyone can take a top spot. And to start us off, we have the first spirit of the entire series, Anahiko. Despite being born a boy, they often found themselves putting on makeup and dressing in skirts. They were made fun of for it, but their mom always said how pretty they looked. However, they would soon find themselves under the care of someone else, who thought such habits needed to be erased, and locked them under the school where they would be taught correction therapy. It's not exactly stated how they die, but one can't find it hard given the conditions they were under. As I said with the Hanako section, I love how this series touches on minorities, and for the first spirit you face to be someone with a lot of transcoding is very sweet. I'm a bit biased as a trans person myself, but sometimes that's okay. Besides, they are really good all things considered. The location they are at is the abandoned school, which you soon find gets taken over by vines and plant growth upon Hiko, which shows how they're taking over areas that were left to rot, and anyone who comes in here, like the security guard we meet early on, are taken by the curse as they don't realize the danger of their power. In addition to that, like Hanayomi, the way we see the spirits' pain and how they act with the bonus of environmental storytelling are on point. The rumors around them say if you hear them ask if they are pretty, you have to say no, which was likely a result of what they were taught to think. Along with that, when we explore the location and find the area they were held up in when they were alive, we learn that they not only took revenge as we see skeletons of many people in agony, but we also find the place looks like it was lived in for a while, which is all I need to hear to realize how bad things were getting for the poor kid. I think that also goes into how they do a good job introducing the main idea of the series. At first, you find the spirit a threat, and in fear makes you want to fight back. However, you later learn the backstory of the spirit and how they were a victim, and that the case isn't so simple. Despite being hinted at by Mary to destroy the thing, you can't help but want to heal it. When you weaken them during the final encounter, you can hear them cry out in pain as they're ready for you to finish them off. So in that, you give them what they wanted instead. You help put lipstick on them and show them in the mirror once more, where they asked if they are pretty, but this time you say yes. On top of that, they are the one who reveals the truth that if someone doesn't listen to the warnings and perpetuates violence on them, they will have someone they love taken away. A good lesson on how hatred perpetuates hatred. On another note, there are a few things to mention. The design is decent. Despite their morph state, we can see a vaguely human appearance. Some minor complaints I will say is the spirit has 2 annoying fan service moments, and there is a point where you have the most adventure game logic moment to progress. Those complaints are minor but worth mentioning. Otherwise, Spirit does a great job in what it needs to, and the connection to the backstory does make me sympathetic, all the more with the poor soul.
Number 8. Slit Mouth Kashima, Death Mark 2. Kashima was an aspiring hairdresser who had a crush on a teacher. The teacher didn't want anything to do with it as he just wanted to be friends, but Kashima sensed a deeper connection, so she wrote a confession note. However, some other people who had a thing for the teacher were jealous and decided to frame the teacher for sexual assault, which worked in part because of their families being very powerful. This caused the teacher to turn to alcoholism and die in a car crash. This caused Kashima to take her own life in despair for how the girls took her love from her.
One of the unique cases where a spirit isn't painted in a completely innocent light, as she was lusting after a teacher who wasn't into her. You could call her naive, but it does its best job exploring the complication of love that Death Mark 2 covers that isn't the main antagonist. Once again, I'm sorry to the Yuri, it just didn't do it as well. The backstory honestly does have a lot of layers to it as well, because the victim the spirit is after is a person who caused the incident, which wasn't exactly someone I really wanted to say, but death also was a bit much for what they did. We also have the poor teacher who suffered from being caught in the middle of it. It's hard because in order to purify your spirit, you have to feed into those delusions and make it seem like the teacher did love her, as that was the one thing she had. It's an interesting contrast I think could be explored deeper, but for what it needs to, I think it does it well. He is otherwise a very decent threat. Her ability to make scissors burst out of someone's skin is quite gruesome and not a way I would want to go. In addition to that, her design having scissor legs makes her constant approach all the more eerie. In fact, she also has a bit of a stalker vibe, and her location plays off that well because it's kinda all over the place. She isn't tied to anything because her desire is to hunt her prey, and she won't stop either once she's set her eyes on you. The other part of her design I like is the scissors in her torso being split in half that further complements her scissor obsession. That was cruelly morphed from her innocent dreams of becoming a hairdresser. Another interesting detail is how one of the girls who died also becomes a spirit you face off as, which goes with what I said with the pool spirit section and how it perpetuates this cycle. The encounter with her is a bit annoying as you need to say her name, which the way that game explains the logic doesn't make much sense. It might be a translation error or something because I don't see it. Otherwise, her live or die sections are fine and make sense while still having a bit of challenge to them. Unlike the other spirits, I don't have the most to say about them otherwise. They do what they need to for a spirit while also finding ways to stand out and not being a copy and paste. It works well for the story of the game and there isn't any annoying progression or issues that hold it back, or at least major ones. I experienced this one and have a good time while not finding anything super outstanding or unforgettable at them. And while I always want to see something unique, I have to give credit where it is due, so this ranking is a fair reflection of that. Number 7. Uroshima Woman, NG Spirit Hunters. Despite what it may sound like, this isn't a character from Umineko, despite the fact they clearly have enough in order to create a spirit within themselves. Also, it's Urashima, not Ushiromiya. This is instead about a pregnant woman who was subject to one of the worst midwives ever. For this midwife not only collected human fetuses as a result of her inability to have a child of her own, but decided to take the woman's baby for herself. She would later murder her by stuffing her into a suitcase with a bunch of rocks and chucking it into a lake where she would forever cry out for her child, not knowing what became of them after that day. First off, that's one dark backstory even for this game. Normally the people involved are meant to show realistic tragedies, and I'm not saying a midwife who collects fetuses and steals children doesn't exist, but that's a bit extreme by this series' standards. Still, the subject of how a pregnant woman was exploited and how women couldn't fight back because of it certainly shines light on the issue. The amount of effort it takes to go through that process and the connection you build through it being ripped away at the end by someone with more power is quite unfortunate. Her actions during the game are all in the effort to protect her child. The fetuses the midwife collected were also thrown into the lake and mixed with the turtles that lived there to create a mix-it-two. This often creates consistently good live or die sections, as you need to take into account her love for her child and trying to satisfy her in order to not die. Except for the cops though, they're somehow some of the most inconsistent ones to avoid in this game. This helps with teaching the player how to interact with spirits, as they are the first official spirit of NG, not counting Yuri Takemura. And it's possible the player could start with this game as it is a different cast of characters from Death Mark 1 and 2. And we also see a lot of the horror portrayed of how dangerous the spirits are, for anyone who gets in their way is quickly killed. Yet we also see the horrors of her trauma, both in her actions, but also in the horrifying image of the midwife stealing the baby that is forever engraved in me as how perfect it's showing the way that the spirit's grudge manifested. Other positives to note are the location, which is an abandoned park that you have a lot of trouble getting into. This helps create tension when you finally do, as you're not supposed to be there. The park also has a variety of things to see, such as the fountain, the lake where you can only move with the small rowboat you have, and the temple at the end that was used by the spirit to pray for good luck. Plus there's a lot of good scares with the stroller appearing out of nowhere that keeps moving all over the place. The design does a good job of showing her tethered hospital gown she was killed in, and just making some minor adjustments to bring out her intimidation vibe. Which is not to say she wasn't pretty when she was alive. In terms of the encounter, my only real issue is the awkward way in which you need to use the correct items. For the first one, you need to use the yoga book, but I didn't think that using it on her, Akari would just chuck at her as you need to instead throw it away to distract her. And then in the next seed, you have to give her the safe birth amulet instead of chucking it because she can't see throwing it. Which, I mean, there is a logic, but it's still kinda mean. The final part is good though. Not only does she reveal the mouth hidden under, but there are also smaller touches that represent the toll the pregnancy took on her, and purifying her revolves around you proving her son is alive or well, giving her the relief she needs after all those years. However, this spirit also goes to show how good NG's bad endings are if you destroy her by presenting the fake stillbirth certificate to show her son is dead, as she will take revenge against Hazuki. However, she doesn't do it right away. Instead, you have a bunch of normal stuff with even Hazuki having a more personal moment where she sings with you and all that fun stuff. They even have a fake scare where Hazuki doesn't answer but picks up in the end. Things seem fine, but Hazuki says she feels queasy and asks to stay at your place where you continue to have a bunch of fun banter before you get one last call. A call from the the Hiroshima woman that reminds you of how her rage still lingers, and soon after you find Hazuki killed in a brutal manner. As a person who was upset with Death Mark 1's lack of CGs for character death, this not only was a pleasant surprise, but also showed that they were willing to up this game in terms of how they presented it, and the Hiroshima woman does an excellent job at showing that. The only minor complaint I have are the fetus turtles that are more weird than scary. They tried, but there's only so much you can scare me with a PNG of a baby on a turtle shell. But it's otherwise a really strong spirit that's just outside of the top 6. She really helps get NG on a strongest start of any of the Deathmark games, which is in part why it's my favorite. Number 6. Now it is time for the top 6. These are what I would call the spirits who define the series and make it so special. They are all excellent in many ways, but do something in particular that really goes above and beyond. They were far the hardest to rank because I couldn't exactly bring up my issues I had with them to knock them down, because the one they have aren't really enough to do so. That doesn't say I couldn't nail them down in the end, but no, any spirit who ranks here is truly top tier even if they only get number 6. So without further ado, out of the ones left, I found that this one just wasn't as good, and that is the Cannon Soldier from Deathmark 1. Once again, not related to any character in Umineko. During World War II, the Japanese committed many human experiments in order to form a powerful Buddha figure with the head of a woman and a body of a man. When it was conceived, the ones in charge didn't think it would work, but a certain doll named Mary whispered into its ear to bring it alive from the grudge it bore. It would later massacre the soldiers in the lab as revenge. First thing I have to mention is how funny it is that someone was like, yeah, this probably won't work, but you can try it anyways. Like they thought this was a good use of time, money, and manpower during one of the biggest wars in history. Okay, but that really is just a funny observation. It doesn't matter that much. What does is how dark this spirit is otherwise. Not only do you explore the underground lab that they used to make this thing, one that is filled with many corpses and the remains of the experiments, but you hear what is meant to be empowering war music, although it more feels like a mockery, as this is not what I would call a necessary price of war. Instead, what the sick, twisted minds who abuse this time of turmoil in order to carry out their own fantasies. And unlike the Jingle Bell music, it isn't annoying and doesn't hold the spirit back. Similarly, you also have the Buddha imagery, which also feels like a mockery as well, as it's far from what it's meant to be seen as. One thing I love about this spirit is the fact you don't know the extent of it until you meet it at the end. You know it's some kind of human experimentation, one the game doesn't shy away from showing you flashbacks of, but what exactly did they make in the end was all I could wonder. Whatever it was able to kill everyone here. One theory / personal headcanon I've always had about this series is that the larger one's grudge is, the more powerful the spirit is. For that's why it takes a huge regret to make one in the first place. The Cannon Soldier is one that was born from what can be tied back as one of the most inhumane experiments ever done, Unit 731, which bears a powerful spirit that we even see a moment of how it was born. How in their moment of weakness we hear Mary whisper to them about fighting back. That not only shows how these spirits were created, but also a very clever hint on how to purify them, for you need to destroy the right ear where they heard the voice from. Everything else is solid around the board. The live or die sections make sense, even if Nii and Hiro during the bells at the end in the final encounter was a bit random. Not because it didn't hint at it at all, but because it asked for a shrine maiden. She's more of a doctor. The reason you do choose her is because she's a woman. The design of the monster was revealed to be a very solid mix of the source material Buddha with the cool twist of the hands covering its face, which revealed what it was actually like. The bad ending also does a decent job, as we see Hiro lose her mind just like Miss Sue did, as they both know each other before death. And the spirit leads well into the final fight against Mary due to her connection to it and the fact that it really speaks to how bad the regrets get, as the worst of humanity is laid bare, and with it the amount of hate for it. As for why it was only number 6 in the end, I think it has to do with the fact that it probably didn't get as much time as the ones above it did. What we get is good, but getting more of a thing you really like is just going to be something I prefer when both things are equally good. A small reason, but as I said, it was hard to rank these final 6, so sometimes the reason they are here is because of something small like that, as it was needed to differentiate each member of the list. It's also because the number 5 spot shares a lot of similarities to this one in terms of human experimentation, connection to the main antagonist, and a really unsettling yet unique location. Number 5, Screaming Author, NG Spear Hunters. In order to steal Kakia away after the magic was lost from his hands, the famous children's horror author decided to use human dolls. While cruel, the fate of what would happen if Kakia escaped would otherwise be far worse. So, every 10 years, he would kidnap a young girl and turn them into a doll, which wasn't an issue thanks to his medical experience. This worked the first 3 times, but for some reason the 4th time around didn't, and Kakia escaped. In addition to that, the bitter grudge of the final girl killed the man as well, as she was now hideously deformed and never got to perform her ballet dance that was supposed to happen when she was kidnapped. First off, this is the third spirit of the game, so you steal a Killer Peach and Demon Tsukiyomi before you face up with Kaguya. I think it works because it helps you make you feel like you're making progress, as you otherwise are just playing Kaguya's game, which seems otherwise endless. That's not to mention how much the spirit shakes with the formula of how spirits goes that keeps you on your toes, as the player might otherwise be comfortable after taking down 2 of them. Let's look at them, shall we? Starting off, the location is actually small. The house at first seems pretty ordinary, just a normal abandoned place, but as soon as you make progress, you find it's actually looping. This creates an unsettling vibe that as you constantly repeat the same area and end, hoping to make progress. This makes sense considering the way that the first 3 times the experiment went well, but it was the 4th and final time where you finally break free, as that was when all hell broke loose. In addition to that, each time you progress, you find another one of the victims, as you need to help them heal a bit in order to help free the mask in order to progress. Another detail that builds on that is how the spirit takes a while before it attacks you. At this point, you're prepared for that, but you have to wait a while with only a few warnings and scares here and there to remind you that it's there. It's only after you start lowering your guard because of that it decides to attack. And that attack comes is just as you're making progress in the mansion. This also makes sense from the spirit's perspective, as they call out not to be seen, so only when you keep pushing forward do they decide to fight back. You make progress to the place. The backstory really helps with making things interesting. Not only are there a bunch of connections to Kaguya, which helps to move the larger plot along, but she's hearing the man behind it with his careless voice, so the suffering of his subject is another. It all builds up to a good reveal that the spirit wasn't actually the man himself, but one of the victims. And don't forget just how terrifying that corpse is. It's both a fitting end for a person who committed what he did, but still cruel the same. It's only later that we learn his actions may have not had the malice we once thought, which begs the question of whether he was in the right. It's also fitting for a series where what you see on the surface often doesn't indicate the true nature of what's inside. The final confrontation is really good. The design for one is amazing, as we see her poor body deformed from the experiments to every degree one could think of. It really pays off for never wanting to be seen for herself. The encounter is also intense, as you're constantly being thrown around by her trapping you in her wires, and Akari has a few action scenes as he tries to pull off the moves needed in order to purify her spirit. In order to beat the final encounter is pretty clever, although I wish for the first part there was a clear indication you could interact with the wire, because I swear I checked it before, but couldn't find a place to interact. Otherwise, you need to be pretty clever and use the hints around you to figure it out. The Purify is also a place where the game throws a curveball, as this isn't the final action. No matter what you do, you have to burn her free from her binds, which really makes you question if you did it right, further exemplified by no clear white or red mist that comes from such fact, but only her last action. As for how you can pacify her, I'll admit that they could have communicated it better. She says not a crane, which can be both seen as I'm not a crane yet or I don't want to be a crane. Whichever way you interpret it is which ending you get, and if you don't know which is which, that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. But it's made up for by how if you do it right, she joyfully dances the best she can as she's freed from her confinement. Into that, the bad endings are okay. Not bad, but I kind of feel like they could have done more. Banjo's is kind of him getting snatched by wires. Rosé's a bit better with her stretched out by getting caught in them, but once again, it's made up for by the fact you get a really cool revelation about Rosé if you play your cards right, which is a cool bonus. Overall, the spirit ranks really high because of how much it shapes up the formula, which is really important in horror because people aren't going to be scared if you keep doing the same thing over and over. That's why most horror games don't scare me. But this one is a prime example of why Deathmark stands above them, as it knows how to keep you on your toes by constantly changing what you expect. Number 4. Great Kairazu, Deathmark 1. Long ago, a princess was assaulted by her retainers and left to her own devices in a forest. Because she was naive and had no survival instincts, she died. But when she did, people found her covered by frogs by mere chance. They saw this as a sign of her being part of the gods and prayed to her spirit. This soon gave birth to a god nicknamed the Great Kairazu, one that was a mix of a spirit and a powerful force that lingered within the forest. And to those who would not respect their god, they would soon meet one of many cruel ends. I think it says something that this is the first of the 2 Deathmark 1 DLC spirits to show just how good they were, with this being the most recent one that I played through. Maybe you could say it was recency bias, but I have to say they knocked it out of the park, especially considering only one other non-main antagonist ranked above it, which is the other DLC spirit, which once again shows how good they were. And like the spirit below it, this spirit really stands out with how different it is. It's not a normal spirit, but instead a god who has grown agitated from the fact that people built a fucking amusement park where its shrine was, which is fair enough, and while it seems a bit of a weird combo for this series, I have to say it works. Most locations in Deathmark are very grounded or ordinary, which connects to how the spirits were once normal people who bore spiritual something a real person person could have suffered. The Great Kairazu is not that. They are a god that, while has a backstory, is more there as a way to illustrate the way God grew into its power, as it's revealed upon it near the end of the investigation, and because of that, it has a unique location to mimic that. In addition to that, the spirit put its money where its mouth is at. For the large imposing figure you see early on, to how this spirit creates a bunch of smaller slug monsters and normal people to further empower it, to it being able to manifest in Mo's dream, which for clarification you play as Mo for this DLC, to her being transported to another world at the late stages of the investigation. This is not your average spirit, and it makes the prospect of facing it all the more daunting. It also just takes out many of Mark Bearers and even Yashiki and Mishida themselves, which is something no other spirit can say they did. Seriously, Mo is in over her head for this one. Another thing I like about how this is a god is the fact that it impacts how you think about it. You have many different things it does, from the slug man to the man eating flies to hanging corpses to their messed up faces. It feels impossible to fully comprehend everything it throws at you, which works well for a being beyond our comprehension. And this works well when you finally face it. The liver dissections are pretty good, although I felt the one with getting Mishida back to his senses was a bit of a toss-up. And also during his face-off, why can't we use the road salt from the start? I was screaming that the whole time. In addition to that, what the fuck is salt candy? Why does it exist? Who made this? This is probably what the god was upset about, and I would be too. The final encounter is pretty good. The design reveals the giant frog towering over you, which really puts me on edge, knowing how fucked I am if I say the wrong thing, as you need to figure out the god's identity and pay the respect it's long desired. I just love how it tells you to remember that well, for even though you defeated it, it still lingers because while the spirit may have healed, the power of the god can't be purified, which is a nice touch. The good and bad end are also good, as you need to clean up part of the park in order to show it respect so it grants your wish of going home, or instead face the fate of being trapped in the other world for all of eternity until it decides to feast upon you. Fun fact, I actually got the bad ending my first time around because I didn't go to the shrine location until the very end of the investigation for some reason. I don't know why, but it was very funny in retrospect. Everything about the spirit is just so well done, from the build up to how it represents this idea. I feel like it could have been number 1 if it weren't for how special the next 3 spirits are, because those 3 just have so much to them that I couldn't put them any lower. And as such, the highest ranking Great Kairazu could reach is number 4. Hopefully this is enough to satisfy it so it doesn't send me to the Shadow Realm. Number 3. Out of the 3 left, we have 1 from each game left. So it's here we cap off the final spirit of NG Spirit Hunters, Kaguya. One day, Akari received a letter from someone claiming to be Princess Kaguya, but we later learn she pronounces it as Kaguya, as she's a child, as they want to play a game. Akari tries to ignore it, but when they take his niece and threaten that if he doesn't play along, both him and his niece will disappear, he is forced to play along. This game involves hunting spirits and won't end until Kaguya wins. Why would she do this? Well, when the screaming author got the 4th kid, that kid actually was old enough to hit puberty. This got Kaguya, who had the mind of a child, curious about adult stuff, and she escaped to the real world to experience more of it. In particular, she is curious of a game adults play when they're alone together, and she hopes to experience it with Akari one day as she's so fun to play with. The main antagonist of NG Spirit Hunters and probably one of the most fucked up versions of the story of the Bamboo Cutter, we have Kaguya. Early on in the story, she doesn't play a huge role as she mostly delivers Akari the next spirit, but still displays her childlike innocence. She probably doesn't even realize the harm she does, but no one can stop her because of her power, and she does prove a great threat as no one before has apparently won her game for obvious reasons. But even still, the minor details are really good. Right before you face each spirit, the mark of mouths spawns on Akari, which is far more disturbing and stressing than just the mark of the last game, especially since it gets worse each time the clock ticks down. In addition to that, she reads off a fairy tale each time, saying it will end happily ever after. This is such a nice personal twist that helps give us a glimpse into Kaguya. However, as the game goes on, you get more glimpses of who she is. When Akari finds out about NG, which stands for Nagoshi no Ji, and is the ritual to steal her, she warns you not to get closer. She's also shown that when Akari does well, she tests him more and more, giving him harder spirits, beating off the mark's effect, to just not even saying the spirit he has until after he finds the mark going off. When people like Akari's aunts get too close to figuring out the trick that she used to steal Akari's niece away, she curses them as well. She's never someone who doesn't find a way to bother you, little by little as you play along. However, despite the hopelessness of the situation, Akari fights on. You get hints here and there that there is some way to beat her, especially after the Screaming Author chapter. You know she is as unbeatable as she seems. He even is able to reacquire his niece by figuring out the secret of the mirror world. Despite this, he soon finds that version he reacquired was Kaguya in disguise, who wanted to live among her big brother she had grown so close to. And when he figures that out, she tosses him into the mirror mirror world and make sure she is the only one he loves. As you can see, Kakia has a lot of really good build-up that shows her possessiveness, and it all peaks in her final encounter where she makes her intentions clear. She gets him to rid his mind of his friends and have only room for her, and when that is done, she's ready to play adult games with Hikari as she transforms from a cute facade to what a naive child thinks of an adult. This is by far one of the few times this game has creeped me out with how her true intentions are laid bare. While she may have love for Hikari, that love is naive and ignorant of reality. But unless you are smart, it doesn't matter. She will get her way, and if you fail, you'll hear the springs of the mattress as she decides to dedicate her love to you. It's only by playing smart that Hikari finds himself able to reseal her in the mirror world, stopping her for now. Or it would be, but just like with Mary, if one of his close friends died, the impurity allows Kakia to appear once more as Hikari finds a similar red umbrella outside. He's drawn back into the mirror world by a close friend of his where Kakia gets what she wants, once and for all. It's interesting, but her innocence is also an important lesson in how such can be used to cause chaos in the world. You can see it in spirits she summons where the Hiroshima woman didn't know her child was alive as well. Kubatara of Kentucky didn't know the true nature of her brother. The truth of the screaming author's actions were not as malicious as one would think. Killer Preach didn't know the one guy was already dead, and Demon Tsukiyama didn't know their wish would birth the beast they would become. It's only by helping heal that can some peace occur. But just like Mary, you can only seal her, but not kill her.
There is even a worse ending you can get that complements this, which happens if you let both Amanome and Hazuki die, in which a grief-stricken Hikari is given powers by Rose to become a spirit himself after the grief of everything he's lost. This continues the cycle as he lashes out and kills both his niece and aunt who he works so hard to protect and save, and even needs Yashiki to come and try to cleanse his spirit in the hope that there's still something that can be salvaged. It's a good full circle moment that is ironically much better than the other two endings.
She also has a solid connection to the bamboo gutter. For those unaware of the story, it talks about how a princess from the moon was found on Earth, just like how Kakia escaped from the mirror world, such realm of the dead. There, she finds 5 princes with impossible challenges, which fits how Kakia gives Hikari 5 spirits to face before facing him directly. And finally, she leaves back to the moon just like how Kakia is resealed away by Hikari once more. Overall, Kakia stands as a really compelling villain that constantly keeps me engaged while also knowing how to scare me. For just as dangerous as hate is, so can love be in the same way. Number 2. Now, the final 2 I could make a case for why either of them is number 1, as I go back and forth between them. In fact, when I ranked them after watching the game the first time, more in my head, I had the ranking switch, but these 2 are still at the top. Even then, I will give them a ranking, and in the end, I found this one just barely loses out on number 1. But honestly, it's a bit more fitting it gets the number 2 spot, for it is none other than the main antagonist of Death Mark 2, The Departed. Many years ago, in order to satisfy 2 gods to prevent something known as the Departed's curse, they were to host a wedding with 2 women and 2 men who were the purest of their community. Only that was a thinly veiled lie to disguise the true nature of the ceremony. Instead, they decapitated the men and held the women bathed in mold with insects crawling all over them for days on end. In doing so, the 2 women became the departed the village feared, and wished to find the perfect husband to finally have the wedding they desired. Years later, a doll was offered in honor of their loss, but instead they tried to use it to be given human form. When that didn't work, they waited for 2 young girls to enter the clock tower they were trapped in, and took over their bodies to find their perfect husband. And who other than the spirit doctor himself, Yashiki, as he's lured over one day about dealing with them. There's one thing I'll say about Death Mark 2, is that they went all out with the antagonist and how much of a focus they get. It can be at times at the price of other spirits of the game, but it doesn't deny how good they are. For one, no spirit has such a personal connection to the player as this one. Early on, the Departed makes it clear they want to test Yashiki, by having them fight various spirits. Just like the 2 women needed to be best in their village to be qualified. From there, they would feast upon the souls so they could become very beautiful. Of course, if the soul tastes bitter, they would need to eat the scapegoat instead. Thus starts Yashiki's journey to finish them. Now, what else is there to say about them? A lot, that's what. To start off, they present one of the most effective threats that there is in any 3 antagonists and arguably any other spirits do. We see this by how they create an atmosphere of fear in the school as time goes on. At first, the students think this is an unrelated prank to the disappearances, but when people keep disappearing, real or not, they know something isn't right. In addition to that, they can disguise themselves as human, which presents a further threat of tricking people, and now means we have to question everyone around us. To add to that, they only make things worse as the game goes on. From tricking Yashiki into murdering another student by accident, to summoning spirits to siphon the life force of everyone in the school without their knowledge, and you as the only one able to see the ominous reapers above them, to making sure Yashiki will keep playing the game by hiding the bodies at the right time so he can't be accidentally blamed for them. As this happens, more and more pressure from others to not let anyone die, of which Yasuki has not been doing a good job at, keeps echoing to them. All of this is to say they don't hold back, and that makes them someone you can never be too sure of what to expect. This also does a good job of testing Yasuki, as he wants to help any spirit he can, but also struggles with how he isn't doing a good job at it right now. The mystery aspect of trying to figure out who the departed is very unique. Why? Because one person, Michio, is really fucking suspicious. Now, normally one would think it's not the most obvious suspect, but you also can't deny the many things she does. How she has an obsession with bugs, which the departed has a lot of, which to be fair could just be because she's autistic. How she's constantly trying to get close to Yashiki and ask him really personal questions, to her odd white hair that no one else can see. It becomes this push and pull of, is it her? No, it can't be that obvious. Even the game is aware of it at many points, which further adds to the mystery. And the answer is one that I think does a good job of being subversive while also paying off the suspicion. That being, it was both Michio and Doryu who were the departed. Also, the reveal that Michio is also the departed is another really good slow realization as you find a room full of frogs, which is at contrast with their new love of insects. And it works considering the theme of the spirit. The spirit talks about the complexity of love and how ugly it can be, how people want to hide certain aspects of themselves from others so they can be perfect. Each of the spirits sees that in some way, with Hanako being the type of love that isn't really accepted, Kashima going after an older man who really isn't into him, and Kokiri killing others in revenge for the people who took his love. And that is seen well into the end as you face off with them. First off, their designs are good across the board. We have the three forms, from the base form which shows the messed up result of the curse, to the spider that is born dormant, to the final form which shows a corrupt holy man over the tethered remains of the departed. And the final encounter has you give them the proper wedding they always wanted, which, when finally done, allows the pain and agony that was gone through mean something. Despite how difficult it was, Yashiki finds himself happy that he now can give them the love they deserve. And with that love, we see an interesting aspect of spirits explored in the ending, for just as spirits can leave behind grudges, they can also leave behind good memories as well. And that stands as another really good payoff to everything I've gone through the series. And despite everything, love can always be found, both in the departed and the spirits it brought, once more. I honestly don't want this section to go on too long because even now I've yet to mention a good couple of things, so let's do them quickly. The doll being the real Michiu and Doryu is a nice touch that ties well to the story. The bad ending is good as we see Yashiki get consumed by the mold. The true ending I think is more positive than the negatives. I think the girls getting a second chance is nice, but I also wish it wasn't at the cost of the other two girls who had nothing to do with this. And most of the other live or die sections are fine except for the one where you need to shoot him with a gun, which is just as bad as it was for Shinio. However, those are nitpicks that didn't actually put it in number 2, but instead the number 1 just resonated with me so well, and the series as a whole, I just had to put him there. But at the very least, the spirit wins the Best Deathmark Antagonist Award from me in a close battle with Kaguya. Part of me doubts if we'll ever get an antagonist who is this involved and connected to the player in this series once again, because they really nailed something with this one. Number 1. For those who have arachnophobia, beware, you're in for a scare. Here we are at number 1, and somehow it wasn't a main antagonist, but just a normal spirit who is a DLC for original Deathmark. Despite how high the bar is, I have good reason for why this one clears it as a spirit, as I think it defines Deathmark for me, and that is Little Red Riding Hood. When she was alive, she was called the Little Goody Two-Shoes as she had a strong sense of justice. When she found out people at her school were working in Masquerade, a love hotel, she called out to the principal to do something about it. Little did she know he was actually a customer there, and decided to trick her by having her be the vessel for his erotic pleasure. That being a ritual in which he would force her mouth open and drop a giant live spider in her mouth. She would later survive the encounter, but the trauma of the event caused her to commit suicide soon after. You see, the thing with most spirits is while they have a decent message about how we perceive people on surface level information, Little Red Riding Hood explores it further in a more complex way that really stands out from the bunch. Just like the spirit, Yashiki has always had a strong sense of justice as he wants to help people in need. And while it is good to help people, there is a danger that comes with hunted spirits, for they are fueled by hatred that allows them to kill people without realizing the extent of what they're doing. That danger is not just present in a threat to Yashiki's life, but the lives of the people around him. Slowly as he takes the spirit spirit on, his companions are taken over, cursed, and manipulated to be used against him, which leaves a few of them hospitalized with a strange illness they don't know how to cure. Despite this, Yashiki keeps fighting, thinking he's in the right because his spirit deserves to be healed, but Red Riding Hood confronts him about it. During the investigation, they appear at a red raincoat, seeing Yashiki as the trusted adult they were trying to seek, someone they can finally trust to rid this world of evil, and it doesn't matter who gets in the way. While other spirits are obsessed with Yashiki, this one is unique in that they mimic the personality of Yashiki himself. The spirit only wanted to do what was right, but at the same time, everyone around them saw them as annoying and wanted them gone because things were far more complex than they first seemed, and Red Riding continues to fuel that desire for him. This builds to one of my favorite scenes where after she's confronted and defeated by appealing to her sense of justice, she tries to take Yashiki with her, for they are in this together, and if she goes down, so does he. Afterwards, Yashiki finds a small dead spider on the ground outside. He can't help but see the weak animal in need of help and wraps it in a tissue for later. After that, Mishida reveals how he saw that and reminds Yashiki that the living and dead aren't meant to interfere with each other, but Yashiki argues that if no one helps them, they will forever remain tortured by the grudge that brought them to life. Even further to add on to this, the bad ending reminds him of the danger as the lives of his allies are taken by the curse of the spirit. And as we see with Mary, this can birth new spirits as a result. The complex exploration of the topic really resonates with me. Both Yashiki and the spirit on a level I've not seen with any others, as I too want to help the spirits heal, but also know time and time again how dangerous they are. In the end, Yashiki and Mishida represent two sides of the coin, and it's up to the player themselves to decide what they feel is right. To complement this, everything else about the spirit is either solid or above average. The rumors around her about people going insane mimics her backstory well. The location of the Love Hotel is good. Not only does it have a lot of environmental storytelling of all the messed up stuff that went on and makes for an eerie location, but we also see the place get covered in webs later on. The design of the spirit is a pretty solid mix of the spider and sexual themes. This is one of the few times I like the fan service, because it works well to make things more uncomfortable and works with the theming of the section as how uncomfortable a practice like this can be for some people. Also, the spider motif is very good, both in how they are very creepy, thin tempting webs that trap their unsuspecting prey, and give birth to a lot of babies. And they also have a good mix of live or die sections that mostly make sense, that really keep you on edge with variety, such as having Red ask you questions, having spiders fill the elevator, and having Sho turn against you. Everything just lines up well to make you see everything the spirit has to offer. It's not to mention the one gruesome scene you see of the spider getting forced into her. It's really gruesome and does a great job at showing just how much pain she is and really makes you feel for the spirit. I'm kinda sad it got censored. It's because of this I feel the spirit deserves to get number 1. It may have a few flaws here and there. The investigation isn't my favorite, but honestly I forget about that when I finish them up, and I can only see the spirit as my top 1. Well, thank you for watching the whole thing through. Deathmark has been a very important series and I wanted to do something for it. I still think the games are a fun playthrough even if I have spoiled a good portion of it, but I didn't talk much about other aspects that will still give you a good few surprises. I also hope we can get more of the series, although I won't be too upset as the 3 games we have are solid and each have their own strengths compared to each other. If you have thoughts on this list, feel free to share your own rankings in the comments below as I'm more than curious to what others think. Finally, I want to say something about my content going forward. It's probably going to be a bit more sparse as I work on other projects, but I do hope to upload some short stories I wrote in some other projects every now and again before I do something big like Stupid Summary. Otherwise, that's about all I have, so see you whenever the next time is.